Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi ry40wl01b 40 volt topper LED work light. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the battery slot, and it's a fairly good showing here. There's next to no looseness or play to speak of, and it locks into place very firmly and securely. And it can easily hold pretty much any battery you put into the slot. Just remember that the larger the battery, the heavier the object, so whatever you're hanging it off, if you're using a 12 amp hour battery, you're going to want to make sure that it's a very secure object. Overall, when it comes to runtime, this particular light has 4 different power levels, and that's going to give you quite a bit of variety. But on its lowest setting with a 4 amp hour battery, you're going to be looking at right around 85 hours of runtime if it's a fairly new battery. Of course, the older the battery, the less runtime you have because, of course, batteries degrade over time. But for the most part, it's a fairly good showing in the energy efficiency department. On its highest setting with a 4 amp hour battery, you'll be getting around 15 hours of runtime, as long as it's a fairly new battery. So no real complaints when it comes to the battery life on this particular tool, and it locks into place nicely and securely. So quite frankly, everything when it comes to the battery slot and battery runtime is fairly good. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the USB-C port. Now the USB-C port on this particular tool is going to be a fairly simple design. There isn't going to be any sort of fancy power delivery like PD or, Q something or other. It's none of the fancy stuff. It's a basic USB-C port that will allow, fairly slow charging for your smartphone, or the ability to run, say, small, fans or other small, useful objects, and maybe even another light off the USB-C port on this particular tool. Now, if you haven't turned the light on, the USB-C port will not be active, and you will have to cycle through the light in order for the USB-C port to become activated. Now, once you have gotten the USB-C port to become activated, you can turn off the light and the USB-C port will remain activated. So you don't have to leave the light on in order to make use of the USB-C port, which is going to be a nice feature since, well, you don't want to use up all your precious energy in an emergency situation. So overall, it's a fairly simple design, but it's going to be incredibly useful. And I would highly recommend picking up one of these particular lights just because of the USB-C port, because that will allow you to make full use of your 40 volt batteries in, well, an emergency situation. The one thing I would probably change on this, other than maybe giving it some fancier power delivery methods or faster charging, would be to, well, give the port a cover. I'm not quite sure why Ryobi decided not to give us any sort of a port cover here, but it really would have been a nice feature to have an ability to, well, keep dust and other debris out of the port. So other than that, everything here is pretty standard and it's a good design. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the hang hook, and it's a fairly simple design. It's a piece of metal that can easily be put into the storage position or the usability position. You can hang it off 2x4s, you can hang it on the side of 2x4s, or on screws, nails, or hooks. And it's all, well, fairly well designed. I've been able to use it on the side of a 2x4, and I've been able to use it hanging from a 2x4. In both scenarios, it did a good job. I've also used it hanging off of screws or nails, and I haven't had any major issues. And with the adjustability of the head and the tilt function, you can pretty much always get the light exactly where you need it. So I think it's an excellent design. The metal itself seems to be fairly high quality, and it doesn't feel like it's going to bend or get out of shape easily. So no complaints there. It also has the rubberized texture to keep it from slipping when you have it hanging from a 2x4, or to keep it from marring up other surfaces. So quite frankly, I think that this is an excellent design, and I don't have any complaints about the hang hook, and it definitely makes this a far more versatile tool in a lot of different situations. So I think that this is a good design, and it gets a pass from me. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the head, and it's a fairly good performance here. It can easily rotate up, and it can point down up to a point. I would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit more tilt capability here, but for the most part, it's good enough. Now, something I would have really liked to have seen that they did not implement, unfortunately, is the fact that the head cannot rotate completely backwards, which means you can't, well, fold the head back on itself to protect itself during storage. So, unfortunately, this is another area of the tool I would have liked to see a little bit more forethought put into it, but for the most part, everything here is a fairly good showing. It is very easily adjustable. It has enough resistance. I'm not too worried about it becoming loose over time, which is going to be a good thing because, as you can tell, there is nowhere where you can easily adjust the tension on the tilting mechanism or on the rotation mechanism. So let's just hope that for Ryobi's sake, they did a good job in making sure that this was properly engineered from the get-go. So when it comes to the rotating head and tilting head, it's good enough, but you know, there are some areas that they could have improved a little bit more. My biggest complaint here would definitely be the fact that you can't fold the panel down flat against the body to protect the see-through lens, but that's just kind of a minor gripe. So for the most part, I'm still fairly happy with the overall design when it comes to the rotating and tilting head, so it's good enough to get a pass from me. Moving on. Okay, up next we have the LED panel as well as the power switch. Start off with the power switch. It's a fairly simple push button design with a rubberized cover. It's a simple cycle through switch and there really isn't anything special about it. When you press the button once, it turns on to its highest mode, which is 1000 lumens. Press it again, it switches down to the medium mode, which is 600 lumens. Press it again, it goes to the low mode, which is 300 lumens. And pressing it a fourth time puts you at the ultra low mode, which is going to be, well, 100 lumens. And then when you press it again, the light turns off. Now typically my limit on, how many modes it has is going to be about 3, and there better not be a strobe mode mixed in there, which there is no strobe mode on this light, so that's a good showing. But, I can understand why they decided to go with 4 modes since you're using such a large battery. So, really no complaints there. Now, when it comes to the LED panel itself, it's a fairly simple design. It has a plastic cover that goes over a white reflector dish with LED beads on the front of it. And, it gets the job done. If you leave it running for an incredibly long time, it starts to get a little bit warm, but really, it's a fairly high quality product. So you shouldn't have to worry about any sort of overheating or, meltdown issues with this particular light. And this particular light should be able to run for, multiple days straight with a 4 amp hour battery on the ultra low mode. So it's a great tool to have in case of an emergency just because of the ultra long run time. So I really do like this particular design and I don't really have any major complaints. The color that is produced by the light is a fairly neutral white color like pretty much all Ryobi's tools. And I definitely prefer this over the ultra warm of Makita or the ultra cold of several other brands. So quite frankly, I do like this particular light color. I like the light, I like the panel, I like everything about this particular tool, and it gets the job done. Now if you do hold the power button for an extended period of time, the light will turn off, but it does not remember what its last mode was, so when you turn it back on, it will be in the ultra high mode or the high mode. So really no point in holding the button, it's just quicker to cycle through the different options. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the weight of the light without a battery. The light weighs 334 grams, which is, fairly light, and that's about, 0.7 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour 40 volt battery, we're going to see a weight of 1,714 kilograms, which is going to be about 3.7 pounds. So, quite a bit heavier, but that's to be expected with a, 40 volt 4 amp hour battery. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this light in use and my thoughts on it. Overall, I do like this particular light and I love the idea behind it. The fact that this will be able to make use of your 40 volt batteries at an affordable price in emergency situations where you might need lighting or the ability to charge your electronic devices is a must, I think, for most individuals who live anywhere that's prone to natural disasters or, blackouts. So I think for that reason alone, as long as you have 1 or 2 40 volt batteries, in your tool collection, this isn't a half bad tool to pick up just so you can make use of those batteries in those situations. Now, what I'm not a huge fan with this particular tool is the fact that the tilting light panel is not all that versatile. It can rotate enough for the most part, except I wish it did rotate a little bit more so that you could fold it down to help protect the cover, the transparent lens on the front of the LED beads, and that you can't do that, so it does need a little bit more rotation. It just needs that extra little bit of 15 degrees in order to fold down completely, and that would be a lot better. But the fact that you can't tilt it any more than, say, I think it's about 1 o'clock or 11 o'clock, depending on which way the tool is facing, is definitely a shortcoming. It would have been nice to be able to, fold that front panel further down so that it would be closer to, say, a 3 o'clock or even, ideally further than that, but for the most part it's an acceptable performance in most regards. It just needs to be able to tilt a little bit more. I'm not quite sure why they decided to limit its ability to tilt when there's other products on the market that allow you to tilt much more than that. So quite frankly, there is a little bit of a downside there when it comes to the tilt and rotation of the head. I am glad that it can rotate, don't get me wrong. Ryobi might have been cheap enough not to include a rotating head, but for the most part I really would have liked to have seen a little bit more of a tilt angle so that you could get past the the 1 o'clock position and get down to like the 3 o'clock or close to 4 o'clock position, so you could get the light a little bit better directed to whatever you're working on. Now, another thing about this particular tool I think could be improved is the fact that the USB-C port on it does not have a cover. This particular USB-C port is a nice thing to have, and it will come in handy in a lot of different situations. But having it covered to keep debris and, you know, other stuff out of that port is, well, it is something I really like to see. And you can buy aftermarket ones and stick it into the port, but having something that's built onto the tool that you could slide in front of it, or, you know, stick into it that's attached to the tool, would just be the better option here. And since we didn't get that, that's another little bit of a negative there. Now, something else I'm not a huge fan on this particular light is the fact that, well, the original price when this is non-sale is, well, $40, and that's definitely on the high side. I think this particular light is probably appropriately priced in between $20 to $30, and I think at that price point it's an acceptable light to pick up and, you know, add to your tool collection. And right now it's currently selling for, you know, $20 as of, you know, April 14th of 2025. And, you know, at that price point, I would highly recommend picking it up. But if it's selling at its full retail price of $40, I would probably wait till it goes on sale again, just because $40 is quite a bit of money to pay for a work light that has some shortcomings. Now, with that being said, this particular light does put out quite a bit of, you know, illumination, and it can light up a fairly large area and allow you plenty of light to see by, and it has enough different mode settings that allows you to, well, basically get your power saving down from 1,000 lumens down to 100 lumens, which will give you ultra long run times and can, well, run off of a 4 amp hour battery for days at a time, which can be helpful in emergency situations. So in that regard, this is an excellent option. But, you know, just keep in mind that this isn't going to be the end all of, you know, lighting. And I do hope that Ryobi continues with this product line of, you know, making use of their 40-volt batteries in new and interesting ways. So with that being said, let's recap with the pros and cons real quick, and then I'll give you my final verdict on this particular tool. And the first pro is $20 right now. At time of recording, which is April 14th of 2025, this light is currently selling for $20, and at that price point, it's an excellent option, and it's definitely something you should pick up in case of emergencies, as long as you have a couple of 40-volt batteries. So with that being said, let's move on to the next pro. 4 modes. Now, typically 3 modes is my limit, but having 4 modes on this particular light, because of its size, can be useful, and the fact that you can get this thing down to 100 lumens from 1,000 lumens means that you can achieve some very long run times, and in my opinion, that is a pro. USB-C port. The USB-C port will allow you to charge your devices in emergencies, or if you just need to charge your devices. So, in my opinion, this is a pro. Hook. The hook on this particular light allows you to hang this in several different positions, and this will greatly increase the amount of usability that this light can provide you in different situations. So, in my opinion, this is a pro. Well built. Overall, the construction of this particular light seems to be of a high quality nature. I don't see anything on here that feels like it's super cheap or feels like it's going to break super easily. So quite frankly, I'm very happy with the overall construction, even though I'm not completely thrilled with the design. So with that being said, moving on. Small. Overall, this is a very compact and small light that won't take up much room, which can be super useful for when you are transporting tools to different locations or, well, just storing it. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Tilting and rotating head. This is the pro part of that. Overall, I do like the fact that you have the ability to tilt the head and rotate the head, but it's not perfect, but we'll cover that here in a second. And the first con is no cover for the USB port. The fact that they didn't decide to include a cover for the USB port means that debris and other, you know, stuff could get inside there and cause issues or malfunctions. So in my opinion, this is a con. And the next con would be no adjustment for the tilt tension. Unfortunately, there is nowhere that you can tighten or, well, snug things up if the light head does become loose over time due to use. So in my opinion, this is another bit of a con since it's a built-in system with no adjustability. And the last con is that it can't rotate past 180 degrees. Now you can rotate it, you know, from almost facing backwards to almost facing backwards on the other side, but you can't actually get facing backwards 100%. So that means that when you're transporting this light, the lens cover that goes over the LED beads can be, well, scratched up because there's no way of protecting it. Another issue here is also the fact that you can't, well, tilt the angle of the lens or the head of the tool past, you know, basically the 1 o'clock position, and that also means that it's going to be harder to get the light exactly where you need it in certain situations. Say you want to have it pointed straight down, you really can't do that with this particular tool. So those two areas are definitely cons in my opinion, and a little bit of a black eye on this particular tool. Not a major one, but a little one. Okay, that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular tool? I have to say, I really like the idea of this particular tool, and I do like the fact that they did some innovating here and filled a hole in their product lineup. This particular light is going to allow you to make full use of your 40-volt tool batteries in situations that you wouldn't typically be able to use them without purchasing their much more expensive inverter that, you know, is usually priced around $120, or at least that's how much it was last time I looked at it. And so I definitely think that this is an excellent option option for people who live in areas that are prone to natural disasters or, well, power outages. The fact that this thing has such a long runtime with, you know, the ability to run for days at a time on its slowest setting means that this can be a super useful tool in those situations. So, as far as I'm concerned, for that reason alone, this tool comes recommended. But when you also couple it with the fact that it has the built-in USB-C port that will allow you to charge your electronic devices in those situations, means that this particular tool, I think, is a must-have for, well, anybody who has 40-volt Ryobi batteries and lives in, well, pretty much anywhere. So, as far as I'm concerned, at the price point it's currently selling at of $20, this tool is highly recommended. If it's currently selling at its full retail price of $40 US, I would highly recommend waiting until it goes on sale, or if you don't mind, you can pay out that amount of money because it's still cheaper than the alternative Ryobi inverter generator. So, quite frankly, the choice is yours, but for me personally, I do like this particular light, and so this light comes highly recommended. And that is it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we will see you all next time. God bless.